Claude just got a brand new model called Opus 4.7. And honestly, some of what it can do is kind of wild. But the biggest story isn't even the new features. It's what happened to the old models in the week right before this launch. A lot of people felt Claude quietly got worse. There were viral benchmark posts, GitHub issues with thousands of sessions analyzed, even a leaked OpenAI memo piled on. Users were openly accusing Anthropic of dumbing down the old model to make the new one look better. And the timing of everything, let's just say, is interesting. We are going to get into it, so let's get started. Quick refresher on the Claude lineup before we dive in. Anthropic offers 3 models in the app: Haiku, the fast and cheap; Sonnet, the everyday workhorse; and Opus, the heavyweight you pull out of the hard stuff. Up until this week, the top tier Opus was version 4.6, which came out back in February. Opus 4.7 is the update to that. It replaces 4.6 across the board, same monthly subscription, no extra cost. It's just there in your model picker starting now. And the benchmark jumps are actually significant, which is rare for a point release upgrade. On SWE Bench Verified, which is basically the gold standard coding test where the AI has to fix real GitHub issues, Opus 4.7 scores 87.6%, up from 80.8 on 4.6. On the harder version of that test, SWE Bench Pro, it went from 53% to 64%. That's a 10-point jump in one release. And on Cursor Bench, which measures how good it is inside the actual coding apps developers use every day, it went from 58 to 70%. On Vision, which we are going to talk about next, it went from 54% accuracy to 98.5%, almost double. And one of Anthropic's partners reported that 4.7 solves 3 times more real production tasks than 4.6 did. What this means in plain terms: Opus 4.7 beats Anthropic's own previous version clearly, and it edges out OpenAI's latest GPT 5.4 and Google's Gemini 3.1 Pro on most of the big tests. The gap between Anthropic, OpenAI, and Google at the top of the AI race is still tight, a few percentage points. But for coding, Claude is now genuinely ahead, and that's a meaningful win. This is the feature that genuinely made me sit up. Opus 4.7 basically tripled the image resolution Claude can process. And this one change unlocks so much that was slightly broken before. You know how you would upload a screenshot or a photo and Claude would get the big stuff right, but miss the small details? Tiny text, cluttered backgrounds, handwritten notes, messy charts, all of it used to be a coin flip. I tested this with a receipt that I could barely read myself, dropped it in, asked Claude to pull every line item and flag anything weird. And it nailed every line, caught a duplicate charge that I had missed. 4 seconds and done. And it's not just for reading small text. Claude is now much better at spotting specific objects in a photo, counting things, and describing exactly where something is in an image. So every use case where you were relying on Claude's eyes and kind of accepting that it would get it mostly right just jumped a whole tier. And honestly, this one feature is probably the most useful upgrade in the whole release. Next up is a change that is more under the hood, but it affects pretty much every response you get. If you're using Claude for a while, you have probably seen that little thinking animation pop up before it answers. That's the model actually reasoning through the problem. And on 4.6, there were different modes for how much thinking you wanted. You could basically set a budget and say, think for roughly this long before answering. Opus 4.7 threw the whole system out. The old way is gone. It's been replaced by something called adaptive thinking, which is exactly what it sounds like. Claude now decides on its own how much to think, based on how hard the question actually is. Ask it some simple question, quick answer. Ask it to plan a complex multi-step project, it'll think harder. You don't have to configure anything anymore. And here's the part that I find interesting. Adaptive thinking is now off by default in the API. That's new, so developers building on Claude have to actively turn it on if they want the thinking behavior. Anthropic basically said, our internal testing shows adaptive thinking beats the old budget system, so we are making it the only option. For us regular users in the Claude app, this all happens automatically behind the scenes. You just get better answers without thinking about it. Quick heads up, especially if you use Claude a lot, the per token price didn't change. Same $5 per million input, 25 per million output as 4.6. But Anthropic quietly updated how Claude chunks text into tokens. Same sentence now uses up to 35% more tokens than before. So your real per request cost can creep up even though the price sticker says the same. For casual users, you won't notice, but for anyone running Claude at scale, test your actual cost before switching. Anthropic did bump subscription rate limits on the launch day to compensate, so most people are fine. There is another developer-focused feature called Ultra Review. This is a new command inside Claude Code. So if you use Claude Code, you might be very interested to know this. Normal AI code review catches obvious mistakes, but Ultra Review goes deeper, critiquing the work, the way an experienced senior engineer would. Basically, a much smarter code review tool to make your code much cleaner. One more new thing before we get into the drama. Opus 4.7 ships with built-in cybersecurity safeguards. The model now automatically detects and blocks requests that looks like someone trying to use it to hack, finding exploits, writing malware, any of that. Okay, that was the feature tour. Now for some drama. Remember how I said that users felt that Claude got worse in the week before this launch? 3 incidents broke publicly in 2 weeks. April 2nd, a senior engineer at AMD, Stella Lorenzo, filed a GitHub issue that went semi-viral. She analyzed 6,852 of her Claude code sessions. Claude was reading files a third as often before editing them. Her verdict? Reasoning depth had dropped 67% since February. April 12th, a benchmark company called BridgeMind posted that Opus 4.6 had crashed on their hallucination leaderboard. Rank 2 to rank 10. Accuracy 83% down to 68. Claude Opus 4.6 is nerfed, all caps, the tweet went everywhere. But now in fairness, this one got picked apart fast. A researcher named Paul Calcraft showed BridgeMind was comparing scores from different task sets. Incident 3 is harder to dismiss. April 10th, CNBC reported on a leaked internal OpenAI memo. Their revenue chief claimed Anthropic made a strategic misstep by not securing enough compute capacity. Translation: Anthropic doesn't have enough servers to keep up. OpenAI is a competitor. Grain of salt. But for users already suspicious Claude was being throttled, this was gasoline. And Anthropic's own status page backs it up. Multiple Opus 4.6 incidents through April. Outages, elevated error rates. Something clearly wasn't smooth. Anthropic denies any intentional downgrade, but one admission is pretty telling. March 3rd, they quietly lowered a setting that controlled how hard Opus 4.6 thinks. Same questions, shallower answers. Most users had no idea. But April 7th, 9 days before 4.7 launched, they quietly turned it back up. So, did Anthropic sandbag 4.6 to make 4.7 look better? Officially no, and independent benchmarks don't show 4.6 dramatically worse across the board. But a lot of real users felt the difference, and turning the dial down quietly, then backing it up right before launch, bad look even if the intent was innocent. My honest take, I don't think they deliberately nerfed their own model. This is a company that built its entire brand on being trustworthy and safety-first AI lab. But they're learning a hard lesson here. You can't quietly change how a product behaves anymore. Users track it, researchers publish it, and competitors leak memos about it. The whole internet is watching. If you're new here, hit subscribe. See you in the next one. This is Sanjana. Bye-bye.